On today's World Insight, having recovered from the pandemic, how can China also reinvigorate its economy?
And I'm confident with all these measures, and especially now the pandemic has been contained in China.
And the Hong Kong government doing its best to contain COVID-19 after months of social unrest. How's the economic and political situation in Hong Kong shaping up? Raymond Tam, a NPC deputy and also a seasoned politician who served several Hong Kong SAR administrations, explains. And finally, while the world waits for a COVID-19 vaccine, a renowned doctor in Shanghai discusses how to live alongside the pandemic.
Hello and welcome to Way Into Session, a special program of World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The annual press conference of the Chinese top diplomat during the two sessions wrapped up on Sunday. Hot topics such as China-U.S. relations, global cooperation against the pandemic, and other regional security issues came under the spotlight. Some say relations between China and the United States are nearly touching their lowest point in history, but others are confident that the two sides will pull through with a Phase 1 trade deal signed and with efforts to follow through. Here's my take right after the annual press conference by Mr. Wang Yi. The annual press conference of China's State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi just wrapped up right behind me. A lot of questions coming from the press. The Chinese Foreign Minister answered them one by one. Certainly that demonstrates China's determination. Try to have and maintain friendship with a lot of countries and a lot of issues. He went as detailed as the number of surgical masks, medical gowns and aid to foreign countries that China has been providing since the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also stood China's ground on research about the source of coronavirus. He zeroed in on differences between China and the U.S. It's like facts and lies, science and prejudice, in his words. He did say China supports the process of identifying the source of the virus by the international science community, as long as the efforts are professional, impartial, and constructive, free from political interference, respect to sovereignty, and also equality of nations, and avoiding a presumption of guilt. It's been a turbulent year so far, geopolitics coupled with severe impacts of the pandemic. China's diplomacy has drawn attention, but usually interpreted in various ways through different lenses. China, meanwhile, has been, as a rising power, is on the verge, on the learning curve, to deal with complicated situations. That's reflected in the number of questions the foreign minister dealt with at the media briefing. However, one would notice China's top diplomat managed to open the doors still for all sides to work together, whether it's relations between China and the United States, or China and European countries, or China with international organizations like the United Nations. Though it is tough, nothing is set in stone. Efforts for peace, once made, would have far-reaching effects, we hope. I'm Tian Wei from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. So how can frosty China-U.S. relations affect the Chinese economy? For answer, earlier I talked to Lin Yifu, the former World Bank chief economist. One of the things about uncertainty is not just about the pandemic, but also China-U.S. relations, even though it's a geopolitics concept, but this time for the Chinese economy, very relevant. So what about, China-U.S. relations in terms of its dampening effect on China's economy?
Whether that we can maintain good relation is very much depends on the U.S. side. And I like to say, no matter it's economic relation, political relations, and so on, to have good relation is important for China, for the U.S., and for the world.
But Professor Lin, if you take a look at China-U.S. relations, I know you're an economist. You are not going to talk about politics. But if you look at that, China-U.S. trade war, quote unquote, then technological decoupling to a certain extent. And now we see U.S. forcing Chinese companies listed in the U.S. the stock markets to withdraw. And then in the future, there's also likely to be, political interactions between China and the United States regarding China's internal affairs, whether it's Taiwan or Hong Kong. So one after another, what does that mean for China to be able to provide to its own people the economic opportunities that they have been enjoying over the past 4 decades during reform and opening up?
The rise of China not only contributing to the improvement of well-being of the Chinese people, but also to the improvement of the well-being of the people in the world, including people in the U.S. As you know, most of the export from China to the U.S. in the areas of more labor-intensive, low value-added, related to the different necessities, and because of the export of the Chinese product at a low cost with high quality, and allow the American people to enjoy good life at a low cost.
It seems that we could also think about things in a different direction. IMF, for example, predicted Chinese economy is likely to surpass that of the United States by the year 2050. Of course, that's only a prediction, and it's also about the GDP overall. But according to Ray Dalio, of course, a very well-known name in the investment field, China is likely to pass that of the United States very soon as a result of a lot of combinations of factors, including the pandemic, including the trade war. Professor Lin, do you think there is another opportunity in that direction, though?
I think it's certainly also unavoidable, because China has 4 times of the U.S. population. Even the income per person in China is only a quarter of income per person in the U.S. The economic size in China will be as large as the U.S. size. And in terms of economic size, not only China will become bigger than the U.S. I think sooner or later, India will also overtake the U.S. Again, because the population in India is 4 times of the population in the U.S. And once India's per capita GDP reach 1/4 of the U.S., India's economic size will overtake the U.S.
The economy towers over this year's 2 sessions. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended the world and may even irreversibly change the global economic landscape. China faces a huge unemployment challenge and tougher fiscal policy, and is needed for debt risk prevention and control. So how can the country safely begin economic recovery? Is it necessary for China to raise its deficit ratio and issue special treasury bonds to help stabilize the battered economy? Let's listen to Professor Lin Yifu again. Tell me more about your thoughts of Chinese government deciding to drop the GDP target this year.
I think it's a very realistic decision. It's most important to protect the job, the household, and the growth should be considered as adapting to the realistic situation in the coming months. And I think this decision is a very important decision reflecting the Chinese government's intention to protect the people, to protect the job.
Can we interpret this way, though, Professor Lin? Does it mean China foresees very much hard days ahead in the rest of the year?
Well, everything is in relative speaking, but there's still uncertainty about the possibility of second wave of outbreak, and also the imported cases. But relatively speaking, I think that the economic situation in China is better than many other parts of the world.
There were a set of policies and also possibilities regarding how to stimulate the Chinese economy. Now, how much do you think those measures, as many as 40 categories, some even suggest, would really work at a time of difficulty?
And under this, huge impact from the pandemic, the government always need to respond. The Chinese measures is in the same direction as other countries. And so the proposed measure, I think, is a necessity under current situation. And certainly we should make these measures that reach the intended effects of protecting the people, protecting the small and medium-sized enterprises, and also pave the foundation for the future growth of the Chinese economy. And from my readings, all the items are designed in that directions. And the implementation, as you know, Chinese government has good reputation of good implementations.
Professor Lin, 1 trillion government bond, that's something we haven't seen for quite some time. We see that pretty often during China's days when planned economy was pretty much in the play. Are we going back to the tools of planned economy, central planned economy?
I think we need to understand the state or the government and the market is not either or. The governments and the markets always need to function organically in any situation. Even in a normal time, we need to have a market competition, and we also need to have the government to play facilitation role. But this competition certainly has to, contingent on the economic situation. Currently, because of the shock from the pandemic, and the market demand is insufficient, and the government need to do more. And as I mentioned, it's not only the Chinese government, other governments in the world, they take a similar, measures. And with the special bonds, because the local governments, they face tension or difficulties or challenges in protecting the households, protecting the small and medium-sized enterprises, because those measures would be better to be carried out by the low-level governments. But they don't have the fund. So these special bonds, about 1 trillion, the Chinese yuan, is mainly, targeting for supporting the local governments to carry out this emergent job in this situation. So I think it is not a return to the planning economy. Otherwise, if you see the measures that have been taken by the government in other countries. For example, U.S. already proposed more than 10% of their GDP, and Germany similarly. Japan even proposed about 20% of their GDP to supporting their economies. And if you take that as a measure of returning to planning economy, then I think that their measure has been much larger. But I do not see any discussion about the U.S. economy go to the planning economy, the Japanese economy going back to planning economy. So we should not treat this kind of measure ideologically. We need to see what are the economic challenges and what would be the best way to cope with these challenges. And under current situation, we need to get the government to help. Otherwise, the market cannot function well.
Right. Professor, then I would assume with the 1 trillion yuan, how to implement the local governments would be pretty much in competition with one another or against one another for the fund, isn't it?
Well, first, it's a good sign that local governments, they are in competition to do their job. And secondly, in the allocation of the fund, the Chinese government certainly has certain criteria. And based on these criterions, then there are some priority areas and a priority project to be carried out. And I think the allocation of the fund will based on this criteria.
3.6% deficit rate, that's quite a number. Unprecedented, some suggest, over the past years. How is China likely to deal with that deficit? And what does it mean? We, of course, look at the short term because this is really a huge challenge right now. But what about the long term, many wonder?
This is a special case because this is a once in this pandemic is the most serious in a century. And under this kind of situation, we certainly need to take some unusual or even extraordinary measures. And as I mentioned, other countries like Germany has been very prudent in their fiscal policies. But even Germany already adopted measures that amounts to 10% of German GDPs. So we need to understand that we are in a very challenging circumstance in our times. And we should not use the theory that are applicable to the normal time to judge the action in this particular times.
China vows to create 9 million jobs. But many wonder when the economy is shrinking, struggling, how? That's really the ultimate question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that to generate 9 million jobs is a huge task, and that task can only be carried out with certain growth in the Chinese economy. And the measure we discussed will protect the household and will support their consumption that will generate demand, and that if you have demand, then the enterprises can survive and they can expand their business. And I think that the generation of jobs will come from the growth of the economy. And I'm confident with all these measures, and especially now the pandemic has been contained in China, then China can maintain a reasonable growth rate and to make sure 9 million jobs will be generated to meet the demand of the people.
You're watching World Insight, our special program Way In 2 sessions from the Great Hall of the People. The Hong Kong government doing its best to contain COVID-19 after months of social unrest. How's the economic and political situation in Hong Kong shaping up? My interview with Raymond Tam, an NPC deputy and also a seasoned politician earlier serving Hong Kong SAR. A heavy task in the most unusual year, a crucial meeting with a big message. The economy, the pandemic, China-US relations, and the indelible changes of the world all takes courage and resolve. Finally, a gathering for China's annual political season. Interviews with newsmakers and analysis about an unparalleled time. Join me on Way In 2 sessions. Before the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, Hong Kong was in a tight spot with rising protests and violence on the streets. That stoked concerns over law and order. How can Hong Kong SAR's economy bear the brunt of social unrest? So, and Hong Kong SAR NPC deputy Raymond Tam minced no words, spelling out the need for legislation under Article 23 of Hong Kong Basic Law. Here's his take. About the establishing and improving of the legal framework as well as the implementation mechanism for Hong Kong SAR for the national security issue. As a people's deputy, what do you make of that possibility?
I think it is a very positive initiative, not only for Hong Kong, but also for the entire nation as well. As you know, the Basic Law was endorsed and promulgated by the National People's Congress, dated back in April 1990. And at that time, we have the Basic Law, Article 23, stipulating that it is the constitutional responsibility for the Hong Kong SAR to implement a local legislation to give effect to preserving national security in 7 areas. Since the reunification in 1997, some 23 years have gone by, but still, as of today, the SAR government and SAR legislature have not been successful in enacting a national security law in Hong Kong in accordance with Article 23. And that is a political reality. But at the same time, looking at what happened in the past year in Hong Kong, since sometime in May or June last year, Hong Kong has come through a very unstable situation in the community because of some radicals and the opposition have organized on-street demonstration and protests, and many of them actually have gone to violence and illegal acts, and that actually creates a huge concern in Hong Kong. And not only because it has broken the peace in Hong Kong, but also some of the protest requests is to go for independence of Hong Kong, and that is totally against one country, two system. And to many Hong Kong people, only one country, two system would serve the overall interests of Hong Kong, the entire Hong Kong community. And that creates the concern in many parts of the community that the lacking of an effective national security legislation in Hong Kong would be a loophole in the legal system and also law enforcement system to preserve the national security of the whole country. But the political reality continues to be, in the foreseeable future, it is very difficult for the SAR government and for the SAR legislature to be successful in to give full legislative effect to Article 23 of the Basic Law. And therefore, the proposed decision, as announced at the opening session of the National People's Congress plenary session, actually has a draft resolution to be considered by all deputies of MPC to delegate or to authorize the Standing Committee of MPC to legislate a national law which would be applicable to Hong Kong through Article 18 of the Basic Law, and to focus on 4 areas that would jeopardize national security, not only in Hong Kong, but also the entire country.
Mr. Tan, however, some been suggesting whether it is jumping over, in fact, the responsibility of the Legislative Council inside Hong Kong. What do you make of comments like that?
I think the comment is not based on the actual facts. If we read the proposal carefully, it is clearly stated, first of all, it would not cover the entire range of areas or sectors that relating to national security in the current Article 23, that's for one. And it is also clearly stipulated that the current legislative initiative would not repeal and it would not substitute the Article 23 of the Basic Law. It has stated very clearly. And at the same time, the central authorities also state quite clearly that it remains to be the constitutional responsibility of SAR to enact a proper national security legislation in full accordance with Article 23 as soon as possible without any further procrastination in Hong Kong. So I think this new initiative would, first of all, to address the present and immediate needs, and it is constitutional, and at the same time, it would not remove the duty and power of the SAR government to continue the work on national security legislation in full accordance with Basic Law, Article 23. So I would say that would be in parallel, but the current initiative would provide a more imminent solution. What has happened in the past year, and would go, as I have just said, it would have gone a long way in alleviating some of the concerns of the various sectors of the Hong Kong community.
There's another issue. Some suspect the security mechanism or apparatus from the mainland is likely to be more operational in Hong Kong as a result of this. What do you make of that?
I think if we read Clause 4 of the draft resolution, it has 2 parts. The first part actually would give a responsibility to the SAR government to set up a national security department or national security bureau to deal with all law enforcement matters relating to national security matters arising from the new national law to be promulgated by the Standing Committee of NPC. And at the same time, the relevant law enforcement agencies in Hong Kong will have to step up their enforcement power in this respect. So that's the first part. And the second part actually provide that the relevant National Security Ministry of the States Council could set up an agency in Hong Kong so as to ensure that the effective implementation of the national law in Hong Kong, probably through the new law enforcement agency to be set up by the Hong Kong government. And of course, details are not contained in the proposed resolution at the moment. But I'm sure that when the Standing Committee of NPC would have to consider the details of the national law, they would also address this division of labor, if you like, and how the two parties, the one set up by Hong Kong government and the other sent by State Council National Security Ministries, how they would work together in details in the new law. And I'm sure the SAR government would also work on that as well. So details will be further discussed and will be further announced by the Standing Committee. But the essence is that it would put the legislative responsibility and the law enforcement responsibility also on the SAR government, because under one country, two systems, law enforcement in Hong Kong would have to be shouldered by the Hong Kong SAR government and the relevant department as well. So I'm sure that this principle would continue to be the case. But of course, the national security will rise above not only applicable to Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is part of the whole nation, and national security is concerning about the whole nation. So the National Security Ministry of State Council would certainly have a role to play. But to what extent that particular role and function would they be playing would be subject to further discussion by the Standing Committee.
I see. Another important point is some suspect this would mean the end of the one country, two systems of Hong Kong. Do you think that this is really the reality? Well,
if we look at the details, it actually follows exactly the one country, two system roots. The reason being that the relevant clause in the nation's constitution is Article 31 and Article 62 of our constitution. And also, the current proposal is for the Standing Committee to follow Article 18 of the Basic Law to endorse a national law, and then through attaching to Annex 3 to the Basic Law, and to be promulgated in Hong Kong SAR. And throughout, the SAR government would have a constitutional role to play in accordance with the relevant article in the Basic Law. So Basic Law itself is the legal instrument to give full effect to one country, two system principle. And because the current initiative is to act in full accordance with the provision already provided for in the Basic Law, and also in particular Article 18 and Annex 3, that is another example of why one country, two system would work.
And final question before we go, Mr. Tam. Of course, there's going to be a Legislative Council election in about a few months' time, and this is certainly a very sensitive, politically sensitive time inside Hong Kong, particularly given the earlier experiences of political division. So what would that mean when we have a mixture of uncertainties, and now you have possibly a new decision regarding the national security issue related to Hong Kong, and also in the future you have, in a few months' time, a very important election season in Hong Kong?
Well, I have been working for the Hong Kong government for 30 years, and my last 10 years in the Hong Kong SAR government, I was responsible also the general elections in Hong Kong, including the Legislative Council election. I can tell you that there is never a good time and never a bad time to hold such an election in Hong Kong. We would organize and conduct that public election in accordance with the Basic Law and in accordance with the provisions in our local electoral legislation. That is the duty of the Hong Kong government, to conduct such elections in a open, fair, and equitable manner. And that is the principle that I'm sure my successor would strictly adhere to. And of course, in Hong Kong, we are an international city. We are also part of our country as well. As one of the former CE put it, we are the super connected to the rest of the world. And therefore, there are all sorts of people in Hong Kong, all sorts of political forces operating in Hong Kong. Hong Kong people has witnessed all kinds of political uncertainty, but we managed to weather the storm because we have full confidence on one country, two systems. We have full confidence on central government. We have full confidence in the rule of law in Hong Kong. We still have full confidence that no matter what continue to happen or not happen in Hong Kong in terms of political landscape, in terms of uncertainties, but Hong Kong people, under the care of the central government, under the support and the constitutional support of the basic law, the one country, two system principle, we will continue to rise above all challenges and difficulties.
Welcome back. This is Weigh In 2 Sessions. Nowadays, the pandemic overshadowed discussions on economic strategies as well as politics and diplomacy. On the 22nd, Brazil overtook Russia as the country with the second largest number of COVID-19 cases behind the United States. Though China seems to have entered the second phase of managing the pandemic, scientists and doctors are telling people that we cannot let our guard down. So how can we prepare ourselves for what comes next? And what effective measures can governments take? With these in mind, I talked to Professor Zhang Wenhong, the director of the Department of Infectious Disease at the Fudan Huashan Hospital. He said we need to learn to live with the virus, and telling the truth is the key. Good to see you, Professor Zhang. Since our last talk, already quite a few weeks, and it seems things are getting much better here in China. But how to control things in a reasonable level? Well, work and life are coming back to normal. That's probably always a big question for every decision maker.
We are living in a new normal state already. It's not normal, it's just a new normal. Whatever measures are taken by countries around the world, the overall goal is to control the epidemic situation with a controllable range to avoid overwhelming our medical system and excessive mortality, I think. If the epidemic surge again, we need to trigger the warning point, and the measure would then upgraded again. So this is the basic strategy we can take. And I think actually today maybe the epidemic level is not so high. So we basically actually, I think we have almost back 90% of the normal state. Yeah.
You've been fighting COVID-19 for quite a few months. What has China done right, and what lessons have China learned so far? In retrospect, what do you think about all of these very important questions?
Different cities, actually, the level of the epidemics is totally different. Just like Wuhan, we just take a very strict strategy to control the peak. So you know that almost 60,000 medical health care works, we just went to Wuhan together to fight the peak. However, in the other city, just like Shanghai, the epidemic is not so severe. The Shanghai government just took a more lighter control measures. Stay at home were not mandatory, and the citizens could go out for food, shopping, banks, hospitals, and etc. Now, all life necessities facilities remained open for normal life. So I think in China, we just take the different strategy individually according to the epidemics in China. So therefore, in fact, in the other cities of China, as the epidemics, you know that today were all controlled very well. So today, I think in the near future, we just take the similar strategy.
Yeah. So it seems that, Professor Zhang, you're suggesting we need to minor adjust it all the time. Once things change, we need to act swiftly and efficiently. Is that what you're suggesting?
The world, actually, we know that it will almost before the vaccine launched, we know that we have to live with the virus, and we actually are far away from the eradication of the disease. So among which I think we should share the experience and strengthen global cooperation today in the healthcare and the research of course, also the vaccination research, we should work together. So actually, we all have learned lots of lessons from other countries. And of course, we should exchange the experience among different countries. So in this new normal, I think in this new normal state of the world, we should all fight wisely, toughly, and with solidarity. It's very important. Yeah.
What has China learned when it comes to lessons, Professor Zhang?
Before the vaccination launch, I think we have to learn how to live with the virus. Today, I think in all the world, we have lots of cases in the other countries today, but in China, we still have some sporadic cases. So today, we just take the strategies. Every city, we should understand the necessity to take appropriate measures. Even we just have several cases in some cities. However, I think we still need to take just like the strategies, just like taking the social distancing, and I think it still is very important.
Yeah.
So today, I think, in China, we just take the whole, citizens, we work together, we stop the invasion of the virus. So the concept and the voluntarily to cooperate is actually the Chinese version of the herd immunity. So today, we just have a version of herd immunity. Our concept of the herd immunity, we just to work together in every part of the society work together to stop the invasion of the virus and stop the transmission of the virus.
Professor Zhang, on the other hand, we have seen the virus mutate, and things are getting a little bit more complicated than before, to say the least. You see some strange symptoms coming from children in Europe and North America. So what do you make of the realities now? What does that mean for China's control and prevention?
Today, actually, in China, in all the children, the disease is not so severe. However, we notice that it's a very complicated side of this virus. However, according to our analysis, we do not see any remarkable mutations for the virus. So now answering to your question, I think that indeed it has some reports of lots of some complications in the COVID in children, just like some very, very complicated, so I mean the syndrome happened in the children. However, I think according to our, now from what I know, most of these children seem to have developed just like the syndrome, I mean just Kawasaki-like disease. I think it's something like that of inflammatory syndrome. So actually our colleagues from the United States, they just assume that this concerning phenomenon is like inflammatory reaction due to the COVID-19, the virus. So actually, if we just take some treatment to suppress the inflammatory response, I think also we can control the disease. So I feel very strange that in China, we do not have so many children cases related with Kawasaki syndrome. So, however, I think we still need a lot of research to control the phenomenon of this disease. Yeah.
China eventually has to open up. Now we have border control, just like many other economies. But with rising cases in some of the other economies, what is China likely to do? Because we've been able to keep the country pretty much free from COVID-19, at least generally speaking. So what are we going to do with others' numbers are still rising, but eventually we have to open up to them, right? So how can we handle? On the one hand, we are doing such a great job because the number is so low. On the other hand, just as a result of that, we are facing this very difficult dilemma.
We do not have so many cases right now. However, maybe we still have another wave, because you know that maybe in the forthcoming several months, still the whole world will be reopened. So I think we fear about the next wave for that. And actually today, according to the situation in China, maybe we can return to the normal state. However, we still fear the second wave. So in the future, I think two kinds of strategy we will take. One strategy we will protect the vulnerable population, just like the elderly people and also, of course, some patients who have the fundamentally disease. So I think another strategy what we taken, we will strengthen our public health system. If once there's a imported case, we will control the disease immediately. So this is what our strategy. So I know that there should be a second wave in the world. Of course, the China, I think we just one part of the world. I think we should control the next wave because we have a lot of experience which we have taken from the first wave. I think the strategy will work for us to control the second wave in China. Yeah.
So now we see the virus is spreading to more developing economies. Well, it is still running wild in some of the developed economies. So Professor Zhang, are we facing an ever more challenging situation?
Actually, in the previously several weeks, I have a talk with some people, some doctors from the developing country. I noticed that the situation in their countries actually is very severe. I know that if we just want to the people stay at home, take the social distancing, but know that in developing countries, if they stay at home, I think they cannot make money. So it will be very dangerous for their daily life. So today, I just have some suggestion for them, because in the first wave in China and also in the world, we noticed that. So the vulnerable people, the elderly people, and the people very weak, they should protect the vulnerable populations. And this is one side. The other side, I think, the people are the young and who can resist the virus, they can go to work. However, I think nutrition is very important. I just want to have the recommendation for the younger people who will go back to work. I think they should keep their nutrition very well. If they keep the nutrition state very well, I think they can resist the virus.
You are a straight talker. You know, people love that. People love you are being genuine and frank. And sometimes even a little bit controversial. They even call you Papa Zhang, Zhang Baba, huh? Just to show their love to you. What do you make of the communication skills public health officials and also medical scholars like you need to have now because of the so-called new normal?
Actually, I myself is very strange about the situation what I face today. I know that today I think almost every Chinese know me very well. I think maybe I don't know why the style just like me is so welcome in China. I think it's a very frankly talk, and maybe actually in my daily life in my hospital, I always speak like this style. I think as a doctor, I should tell the truth to the citizen. So today, I think I'm very glad that all the Chinese, they agree with me. What is very important, I think, is just to tell the citizen the truth. So this is the key of the communications. Actually, I don't know what will happen in the next stage. Maybe one day, and the people in China, they do not welcome anymore. However, I will tell the truth. That I think this is what I will do in my future. Yes.
That is Professor Zhang Wenhong, and with that, we come to the end of this special program, Way Into Sessions, the World Insight with me, Tian Wei, from the Great Hall of the People, bidding you goodbye, and I'll see you tomorrow.